November 8th, 2011 meeting of the Santa Barbara City Planning Commission to order. Ms. Feliciano, could you take the roll, please?
Chair Jostes,
Here.
Vice Chair Lodge,
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett,
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs, Commissioner Jordan,
Here.
Commissioner Larson,
Here.
and Commissioner Schwartz.
Here.
Thank you. Mr. Cato, are there any continuances, withdrawals, or modifications to our agenda today?
Yes, there are. We are item 4 on today's agenda, 404 William Moffett Place out at the airport, the T-Hangar project. That has been continued to the September 22nd agenda. The reason is it went to ABR on Monday and the ABR didn't like it, so it wasn't ready to come here. So it'll go back to ABR on the Monday before the 22nd, and then we should be back here on the 22nd.
Okay, very good.
Oh,
Anything
sorry,
else?
one other announcement. The next week's meeting, the 15th, has been canceled, and we have in its place, we have a meeting on September 22nd, which is 2 weeks from today.
Okay. Are there any announcements or appeals?
That's my announcement.
Okay, very good. At this point in time, I would like to open up the public portion of this meeting for members of the public who wish to address the Planning Commission on matters which are not on our agenda today. And seeing no one coming forward, I'll close that portion, and we will move directly to our first item of the day, which is a staff hearing officer appeal pertaining to 502 East Mitchell-Torrena Street. Ms. Reardon or Mr. Gullett?
Good morning, Chair Jostes, Planning Commissioners. Before you today is an appeal of the July 13th staff hearing officer denial of modifications for an interior setback encroachment for a new garage and reduced dimensions of required open yard area. The project site is located at 502 East Mitchell-Torrena at the corner of Mitchell-Torrena and Olive Street. The parcel is 5,194 square feet and zoned R2. Existing development on the lot is a 900 square foot residence and 182 square foot detached garage. The proposal would result in a 1,326 square foot residence and a 185 square foot attached garage on the interior lot line. The proposal also includes the open yard not meeting minimum dimensions. The purpose of open yard, as it's defined in the zoning ordinance, is to provide outdoor living space and or visual open space. The R2 zone specifically requires 1,250 square feet of open yard on a lot with minimum dimensions of 20 feet. Open yard may be located 10 feet from one front lot line if there are multiple front yards like there are on the subject property, and it also may be located in multiple areas, unlike the single-family zones. At the staff hearing officer hearing, the staff hearing officer expressed support for the garage relocation toward East Mitchell-Torrena Street and also expressed concerns about the proposed open yard. Staff discussed with the applicant elimination of a then proposed 20 square foot addition in the entry courtyard and relocation of the main courtyard wall 2 feet closer to Olive Street to provide additional usable outdoor living space. The applicant requested denial of the modifications when a request for a full bath in the addition was not granted. The proposal has changed since the staff hearing officer review, but to put the staff hearing officer's comments in context, this is the floor plan that the staff hearing officer reviewed. This is the location of the then proposed 20 square foot addition in the entry courtyard, which has since been removed. And this is the main courtyard wall, which was discussed to be moved toward Olive Street to provide more outdoor area. Also included in lieu of the now proposed hallway was a storage area behind the garage attached to the house. Staff appreciated the provision of storage at this location because it would increase the likelihood of the garage to actually be used for parking. And that's no longer included in the proposal. this is the location of the proposed full bath at staff hearing officer. And this is the current proposed floor plan. Note that that storage space is labeled as gallery. It's essentially a long hallway into the proposed addition. And this is the location of the requested full bath associated with the proposed addition. And also note that portions of the proposal have increased since staff hearing officer review with loss of this proposed addition. These areas do push further into the open yard and the main courtyard. So with regard to the proposed full bath, the planning division does have administrative policies for staff review of floor plan configurations. The main objectives of those policies are to reduce proliferation of illegal dwelling units while allowing for certain desired amenities with improvements, such things as half baths. So in general, if an addition or remodel is proposed with no internal access, like the staff hearing officer proposal, or inadequate internal access, like a long, narrow hallway with a current proposal, staff allows a minimum size half bath, which is a room that's 7 feet by 3 feet or 5 feet by 5 feet with a toilet and vanity sink. No additional sinks are allowed in that area, and no bathing facilities are allowed within the building. One other concern staff has about the current site configuration is the potential separability of units and open yard areas. Since there are 2 separate courtyards that are proposed, that is an additional concern for potential conversion to an illegal dwelling unit with a current proposal. So if your commission is inclined to approve the current proposal, staff does recommend that your commission condition the project such that half bath be provided in the addition. So because the project is located in the Lower Riviera Special Design District, single-family design board review is required. SFDB reviewed this project on one occasion, April 6th. At that time, they asked for the proposed garage to be moved back toward the plane of the neighboring house, which it was. And single-family design board also indicated that there were no negative aesthetic comments associated with the modifications. Because there are single-story designs available that would result in a similar size addition with a conforming open yard, like that concept shown in Exhibit C of the staff report. Staff does not support the current proposed addition. Therefore, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission deny the appeal, upholding the staff hearing officer's denial of the project. And that concludes staff's comments. Susan Reardon, the staff hearing officer, is also here, and we're prepared to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gullett. Are there any questions, burning questions for staff at this point in time? Seeing none, Mr. Zink, would you like to come up and address the commission and describe the project and the nature of your appeal?
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Paul Zink, and my client, Douglas and Natalie Foster, are watching on the internet right now. When I have clients, what I like to tell them is a little bit about how Santa Barbara works. And Santa Barbara has grown, and everyone appreciates it because of either constrained growth or controlled growth. And this growth that has limited the sizes of our structures is put into place, and people appreciate it. With that, at times there has been not one-size-fits-all solutions. But our zoning is put together, broken down into different categories, and we've done our best to sort of say this is what we expect for these zones. When, for some reason, you have a hardship or you have a special condition, a modification is in place, you make a presentation to the staff hearing officer, to the city, and you say, I'd like to have a deviation from the zoning for these particular reasons. It's a subjective review, which is why staff is involved. The staff hearing officer has a review process, and what we happen to be asking for is a little bit outside of, let's say, the cone of vision that the staff is willing to recommend, which is why the project is in front of you, and that has to do with the half bath versus the full bath. I apologize that I'm here, but I'm representing my client's interests. With that being said, the project, you've seen it, it's at the corner of Mitchell-Trena and Olive. If you ever drive on Mitchell-Trena, you stop right there at the corner. And it's a quirky little romantic building. For some odd reason, when it was rebuilt in 2003, the owner carved out a little courtyard and put a little tower in there. And when you stop at that stop sign, you look over there and you go, wow, that's interesting, and then you plow on through. If you're coming down Olive Street, the same kind of thing. You stop there, and the building has a certain amount of architectural charm that exists. One thing that was not mentioned in the staff hearing and the presentation by staff is there is a conforming solution that is available to my client, and that is a two-story option. My client does not want to build a two-story. He wants a one-story. And the one-story is what the neighborhood would also like to see. So my charge is to create a one-story solution for him. I'll pull it down. There's the quirky tower. The original building that was on this site was built prior to 1931. I don't know when it was. The single-car garage in the back was never rebuilt. It was just remodeled and refurbished. The original house was demolished and rebuilt. There was modifications were approved in 2003 to allow this structure to be built on the old footprints. But the old footprint was an actual square or an actual rectangle. That courtyard that we currently enjoy, we as the community, I should say, was always a house. It was always an interior living space. The owner who built this back in 2003 enjoyed being out there in the evening times because it's nice sun in the winter times. And then in the summertime, he spends his time in the backyard where the trees and the shade occurs. So I would like to make reference to that courtyard. It's beautiful outdoor living space. The floor plan we have here, this is the existing floor plan. And on there you can see the dotted setback lines. Because my project only has a single-car garage, and I apologize for repeating things that I said at the site visit, we are non-conforming in the relationship to parking. Thus, the addition that I am allowed to make is 50% of the allowable of the existing house. A 900-square-foot house allows me to have a 450-square-foot addition before I have to increase or make the parking conform. So my charge is to either provide a two-car parking space, which is 20 by 20, or keep the addition less than 450 square feet. Our addition happens to be 425. How I am achieving that is I'm taking the garage from the back and moving it to the front and playing games like that. As to achieve a second-story addition, you can see on the upper part where it says existing driveway, you can see where the setback line is. The drawings say 9.5 feet. Since the staff hearing officer, we did have a surveyor go out there, and the actual dimension is 9 feet 4 inches, and that's what I have with the surveyor. But if my setback is 6 feet, I've got ample room along that side to build my second story. My only limiting factor is going to be my solar orientation. So if I built a modest second story with an 8-foot plate, blah, 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 I can fit 450 square feet on the second floor without a problem. Because it's on top of an existing structure, there's no change to the open yard, there's no change to the parking. That is the path of least resistance, except I would have to deal with the neighborhood in that regard. The modifications that I'm asking for are actually moving the garage from the back of the lot to the front of the lot. And staff hearing officer was receptive to that. So was transportation, because it's attached to the house, they see that as more utilized for parking. And they like that idea. I go back to the interior dimension. My plans, which I'll show you on another sheet, I have 9 foot 3 inches shown on my plans. Due to the surveying, I will have 9 feet 1 inch. I happened to go and I parked my car at the Paseo Nuevo, and I parked my car 2 feet from a vertical wall, and I was able to get in and out of my car. My car is a Honda CR-V. It's 6.5 feet from rear view mirror to rear view mirror. I know there's smaller cars out there, smart cars and things like that. So I'm not worried about the parking. Plus, the parking that I'm providing is identical to what is currently existing. The existing garage has an interior dimension of 8 feet 10 inches. The second modification I'm asking for is to give me credit for that courtyard in the front. It happens to be 17.5 feet by 19 feet. Now, if I was the architect doing that plan, I would have made that 20 by 20 to give that guy the bonus. Because he didn't know all the rules or didn't know that that was going to be an advantage to him in the future, he built it the way he wanted it to be, and now I'm left with this substandard size. But what I like to say is that space in the front, we as the community enjoy. It's beautiful as open yard, but he as the property owner has also used it, so it is part of his classified open yard space. He utilizes that. And then the back area. The 2 brown zones do add up to 1,250 square feet. I'm not asking for a reduction in the amount of open yard. I'm actually regulating and controlling these areas now are preserved or protected. So that's kind of how I presented this package to the modification officer. I wanted to present something that I thought could get approved. I wanted to present something that would enhance the city. We are not being over-aggressive. We are not trying to overbuild the site. We're not doing that. We're trying to do a modest addition here. When reviewing the project, you have to look at the physical hardships as well as the community benefits. The physical hardship is on a corner lot, and we're all aware of that, and you have a 20-foot setback on 2 sides. When calculating the open yard, you can reduce it to 10 feet. So the open yard, if I go back 1 sheet, you can see the open yard is 10 feet, but the dotted line is 20 feet. Oh, no, I don't know how that worked. 15 feet open yard setback when it's a 1-story unit going across. But there's a zone of my yard, 10 feet times 50, that I can't use because it's along Olive Street. Well, that adds up to 500 square feet, which is more than that courtyard. So what I like to say, and what the staff hearing officer always refers to, is the benefits that my neighbors are enjoying and what I am not be able to enjoy because of physical hardship. And that's the corner lot situation. And I'm not allowed to classify my entire width of my lot for open yard due to the corner lot condition. So I've lost 500 square feet there, which is a physical hardship. And the substandard lot size, the lot is 5,100 and whatever square feet. The lot size zoning is R2, which is 7,000 square feet. 1,250 square feet is regardless of the size of the lot. So if I have a 7,000 square foot lot, I'm expected to spend 18% of my lot for open yard. Now I have a 5,194 square foot lot. I'm expected to spend 24% of my lot as open yard. Oh, and by the way, that open yard has to be 10 feet from Olive Street. Okay, so you can see how I've got a small lot and I've got the corner lot conditions. I'm losing ground area. Now my client wants to build a 1-story, but I'm running out of room on the ground. I'm not asking for less than 1,250 square feet. I'm asking it to be counted in a different way. Community benefit. I don't know how long you've driven by here and appreciated or recognized that there's a hard wall and a hard driveway along this side. It is what it is. It's existing condition. The garage is pushed back 65, 78 feet, some number like that. A lot of pavings there. I think I can make that look prettier by pulling the garage forward. Then I'm also connecting the garage to the house, which means people coming home at night can go from their car into their house without having to go outdoors. That's a positive, too, for the occupant of the home. The other extremely positive, which I wanted to point out on Tuesday, was that it's a 1-story solution versus a 2-story solution. The house is a little bit on a hill, you know, whether it's 7, 8, 10 feet high as you go down Olive Street. You put a 2-story house, even with 8-foot plates and a 3 and 12 roof pitch, it's going to start looming. A good architect will do his best, but at the end of the day, it's going to be different. It's going to change the character. It'll also change the character of that tower from the stop sign. So to go through the floor plans, I talked about the interior dimension of the garage. Actually, I went one too many. 1 second. This is what we presented because it was always mentioned to the staff hearing officer, you don't have interior connection. So I said, all right, I'll give you interior connection. I lost the exterior storage, which was a benefit, for what I felt for my client, but we gave the interior connection to have this way of getting into the house to the study. But yes, because of The way the rules are set up, it looks like a long hallway. It looks like it can be converted to an illegal unit. In the past, staff has a tool to use, and that's the zoning compliance declaration. It's filed, it's signed by the property owner, it's recorded with the county recorder, and that becomes part of the legal deed. When the property is sold to the next person, it's given to the next owner as part of the escrow papers. Also, we all know that we have the ZIR, Zoning Information Report, in which every house is walked through, and that document is given to the potential owner, and they're expected to sign it before escrow can close. And on that document, it says it is a single-family, one-bedroom or two-bedroom, two-bath house. So there are tools that we have that we can inform future owners as well as lock the current owner into saying it's not supposed to be a rental. And in this case, I believe there's enough community benefit in having a one-story solution here that it warrants, let's say, the risk involved of the city potentially having this in the future. If you're not okay with that, my client will go with the half bath. We thought about it, we talked about it. At the end of the day, he wants a one-story solution. I'm not going to play some game where give us the bath or we'll go 2 stories. That's not what I'm here for. My client wants a one-story. So we're willing to go with a half bath. I returned the exterior storage where the hallway was, the garage is where it is, and the courtyard divides up.
Mr. Zink, you have 3 minutes left.
Perfect. I'm almost done. What I wanted to point out here is the FAR. Our project is 61% of the allowable with the build-out that we have. The build-out that I'm proposing, which is 50% of the existing house size, there is no room to make this home any larger. Once we're done, the property is frozen in time until someone scrapes it and starts over. And so I wanted to make that clear. But whether it's a 1-story or a 2-story, it still will be around 61% of the allowable FAR. Now, in order for someone to have more than that, they have to put a 2-car garage off of Olive, which is a whole bunch more Mickey Mouse and money. Once you're going to be putting a subterranean garage off of Olive Street, you might as well build a bigger house. So to say that my home is only going to be 1,300 square feet, that's also a major positive. It's a positive for the community. And then my last couple slides are the exterior elevations. If you're interested in seeing how the solar access works, the windows and the sides. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zink. That was very focused and informative. Any questions of the applicant? Okay. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zink, could you talk to me a little bit more about the intended use of what's called art studio versus study?
Thank you. The art studio is where the wife has her trinkets and activities that she wants to have there. So it's just more of a layout space, both for ceramics and for printmaking things that she has. There is those doors that are bifold doors that she can spill out off to the side to do her art projects. And then the study is just his home office where the computer would be, and then it's also going to be a guest bedroom, which is the reason why they're so wanting to have a full bath, because if someone comes up for the weekend to stay with them, they would have to have them come into the house to their bathroom on the other end of the house. And one thing I didn't mention in my presentation, when you were at the job site, there was a blue line, and then there was a blue dotted line on the other side of the kitchen window. And staff makes reference to that there is a one-story solution that is available. It would require the moving of a kitchen window. The kitchen window, when that gets moved, it would trigger the moving of a sink. And then that would have me move the refrigerator, and before you know it, I'm redoing the cabinetry in the kitchen. That becomes not a viable option just because of the ramifications.
Mr. Bartlett? Don't go too far away, Mr. Zink.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's kind of a combination question. I don't know if it's for staff or the applicant, but maybe the applicant can help out. I mean, it's an R2 zoned lot. What would preclude you from just making it a second unit? You'd have to, what, add one more parking stall and add a kitchen, right?
Adding the parking stall is the trick, because I would have to do it along the side yard. And my choice is I could either ask for a tandem garage, which would be 42 feet long on the property line that my next-door neighbor would have to look at, versus me taking this current 21-foot long wall that they look at and moving it forward. So their beauty is not being compromised with a longer wall.
But I mean, the real issue is you can have 2 units on this lot. So we shouldn't be really debating, gee, is it going to be converted to another unit? It's can you comply with the parking that goes along with the second unit? It's really the variable. That's why I was,
Make the parking work, I would feel the best option is off of Olive Street
Right.
because I have the least amount of limitations. Because I would have to ask for extreme favors to put the parking along my adjacent neighbor on the property
did you
line.
pursue that option at all, or did you not really consider it, or?
We didn't consider it because of the cost involved.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Okay, that helps, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Zink? Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Mr. Bartlett, I'm not sure if this is for staff or for Mr. Zink. The staff report from Ms. Reardon said that there was that it was denied because there was an alternative second-story solution. I believe in the original report that was, I may have misread it, but
Do you want me to clarify why I denied it or what staff's recommendation is?
well,
And
I just wanted more clarification on what the alternative staff sees as a one-story alternative.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge, included as Exhibit C, I believe, of the staff report is a concept that Mr. Zink referred to for a single-story addition that provides for conforming open yard. And as he mentioned, that particular configuration would block the kitchen window, so there would likely be one of reorganization of the kitchen and increase in cost for Mr. Zink's client. There's also area in the entry courtyard that could be filled in if that wasn't included as a modified open yard area. The entry courtyard doesn't qualify for open yard because it doesn't have the 20-foot dimensions. So it's not considered open yard now. So to get the 1250, it would fully have to be on this side of the house. So that addition in Exhibit C is approximately here, but there's also options of adding some floor area here to at least get the size of the house that the applicant is proposing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul, I have my couple are for staff. If you want to sit down for a second. Talking about that Exhibit C, I think, Ms. Reardon, this is for you. If they elected to just leave the kitchen as it is and kind of live with your shaded part there, did you foresee offering that with a full bath in that area too, or would it still be a half bath and you'd have the same concerns for conversion down the road?
it would depend on the configuration of the floor plan, on how it is connected. Does it appear to be integrated with the main structure or not?
Okay. So the same questions would be there. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I'm curious. The staff made an offer of something called a zoning declaration, and I have no experience with that. So I think which side of the room that question would go to. My experience with regular zoning issues is they're just an enforcement process that nobody enjoys. One, you have to catch somebody, and then we enter on a long, painful, procedural, expensive process to make somebody comply. And you did a great job in your staff report of noting that you can go through that and the guy can play poker with you at any time and then drop out, put his head under a shell for a couple months, and then start the whole process over again. So is there something that's more credible about the offer of a zoning declaration that gives the city more leverage to resolve that immediately?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan. Renee Brooks, Zoning and Enforcement Supervisor. And the zoning compliance declaration that was referred to is a tool that we use. Just to explain what that is, it's a recorded document, goes on record for the property, and essentially it just states that I, as the property owner, understand that this property is to be developed with just 1 or 2 dwelling units, however many are legally existing on the property, and it's noticed to any future property owners. And we use that mostly in situations where we're dealing with pre-existing conditions on the property. Amenities like full bathrooms and detached structures or other situations on the property that were permitted in the past when we were less restrictive about amenities that could be allowed on the property, and they might have been converted to an illegal dwelling unit. And so they're under enforcement, and we want to just have this added layer, this extra tool to notify future property owners that while this property has amenities that we may not permit today, we don't want you to be under the impression that you might be able to use this as a separate dwelling unit. So it's an extra tool. What we try to do now today that we've learned from the past is take a more preventative approach. We scrutinize floor plans, as was explained, so that we try to prevent illegal dwelling units because we still today deal with so many from past permitted amenities that have been converted. Does that help?
Would it be accurate to say that if I didn't have one of the zoning declarations and I was a homeowner and there was an enforcement action, or if I did have one of those declarations and there was a zoning enforcement action, both of those actions would follow the same legal process? We get nothing out of the zoning declaration that allows us to jump to the finish quicker or shut a person down. It's just as you explained it.
Mr. Vincent.
What a zoning compliance declaration takes away from a property owner is the argument of collateral estoppel, an equitable estoppel against the city. The argument would be that the property owner, because they purchased their property, received a ZIR that said that the property was compliant in its configuration, they thought for some reason that entitled them to rent that unit out as an illegal second unit. They would say, our ZIR said that this configuration was appropriate. It was appropriate if it was used as a single-family residence, not as an illegal dwelling unit. By having the zoning compliance declaration in their chain of title, there is no way that they can, at that point, argue that they justifiably relied on simply the purchase of a configuration that was allowed as a single-family use to be an illegal dwelling unit. So that's the benefit added by the zoning compliance declaration.
Okay. And then on the offer of the applicant's offer of a half bath in his proposal, is that seen favorably by staff?
Mr. Chair.
With all the other considerations remaining the same.
Right. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, it would be an improvement over the preferred alternative of the applicant. Again, with the preferred alternative, which is reflected on the plans before you, there is internal access. This half bath solution, which is on the screen, there is no internal access. It's completely external to. It's essentially an attached accessory building to the main house. So staff would not allow a full bath, and a half bath would be allowed in general. And again, compared to what the staff hearing officer reviewed, this actually reduces the main courtyard area more. So it's preferred over.
Okay.
By staff over the applicant's preferred alternative.
How much of a radar tick is that for half baths that become full baths? Does that happen?
We do look at proposals that have closets next to bathrooms that could potentially be converted into showers. We don't see that with this configuration.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bartlett. Before you start, Mr. Bartlett, I want to give Mr. Zink an opportunity. You wanted to make a response to one of the comments of the commission.
I just wanted to add on a comment having to do with the zoning declaration form. I've had clients that had to go through this process before with floor plan configurations that we got built as an addition or new construction. The one item that wasn't mentioned is there is a fee or a penalty that is associated with this document. And I believe at the time that I remember seeing it, it was $250 a day from the time in which it was begun. So even though this legal unit could have been there for 3 weeks or for 3 months, if somebody has documentation to prove that, then the city's attorney's office, and they can correct me, can come up with an assessment of going, here's the hammer. You know, it's 20 grand or it's a 30 grand hit. You got to clean this up by next week or next year. You know, so that's the advantage of having a zoning declaration, because it spells out for the owner specifically what the rules of engagement are, and that if you do break the rules, there is a penalty, and this is what it's going to be.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had another question that really follows along the direction that Commissioner Jordan was going regarding this half-bath proposal. Is staff inclined to support this direction, given there's no internal access to this portion of the house, even though it has just a half-bath?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Bartlett, disregarding the proposed modifications, just looking at the floor plan configuration, this would be a supportable floor plan.
Right. I mean, looking at the menu of options based on how many sinks and whether you've got doors to the outside, this is one of the configurations that you would accept then. If you have outside access, then you need the half bath.
Correct. There's no additional sinks that are proposed with that addition.
Right.
With this
No, I was just
configuration.
using that as an example.
Yeah. And it has the added benefit of storage that the applicants.
And also, I have one other question, and I guess we can depict it on this slide. Does this wall that runs through the dotted open space configuration, does that diminish the amount of open space, or are you allowed to have walls within your designated open yard?
Walls are allowed in the designated open yard. There's no prohibition of walls, but we get back to the definition of open yard, and part of that is usable open space. So that's where the discussion came from at the staff hearing officer.
The moving of that wall really doesn't change any of the numbers. It still counts as open space, even though a portion is beyond that wall.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I have one question, and that this is basically a R1 lot zoned R2 on a corner. And the fact that it is an R2 lot raises the question to me, given its proximity and its neighborhood context, is there any option that could be supportable that would include a second unit, however small, on this piece of property? Because, I mean, the message we're being sent by the zoning ordinance is that somehow this is appropriate for a second unit, yet this project, if it were to be extrapolated into the future with the types of improvements here and the concern over an illegal dwelling unit and our housing need, I'm just curious what staff's perspective is on this conundrum we find ourselves in.
Mr. Chair, the zoning ordinance does have special provisions for R2 lots between 5,000 and 6,000 square feet. And there is a reduced parking requirement. 2 covered spaces and 1 covered space are required, but 2 units are allowed on lots between 5,000
That was
and
2
6,000.
uncovered and 1 covered, or 2 covered?
Covered and 1 uncovered.
Okay.
Yes, and there are also reduced open yard requirements for these smaller R2 lots. So this was specifically considered in the zoning ordinance, and Mr. Cato may be able to provide more of a history of this. But given that it is a small lot and on a corner, that makes it even more difficult, and that the applicant is trying to work within the constraints of the existing building rather than demolishing the existing building. It does make it difficult.
Okay, so the nuance is that technically it's possible, but practically it may not be possible. Mr. Cato, further context?
As we discovered in the charrette for Plan Santa Barbara, parking drives everything, including this, right? In order to get the accessory dwelling unit, which Mr. Gullett was talking about, you need 3 parking spaces. Where are you going to put it? You know, I mean, so that's the physical limiting factor, and I suppose financially limiting factor too, because I guess it could be possible to put an underground parking or something off Olive Street, but pretty expensive, seems like. So there are definitely limitations.
Okay, that helps. Boy, the lights came on. I didn't mean to be so provocative here. Who would like to start? Let's go with Ms. Larson.
I just have a couple of questions that I had studied the plan before, but in listening to your presentation, Mr. Zink, with this being the art studio and there being ceramics, I don't see any sink in here or kiln provision. Is that something I'm just missing? And is there a laundry provision for this home? I didn't find that either.
Okay, 2 things. One is the laundry is located in the master closet.
Oh,
and it's an
okay.
existing, there you go, and there is a
Oh,
permit
yeah.
for it in that location.
Thank you.
I want to say ceramics probably was a wrong word. She does jewelry, and she does like little tiny welding, and she has, so it's not ceramics as in pots, but it's tiny stuff.
Thanks. I just, because I've designed studios, and I thought, oh, what's missing there, after you talk. So, thank you. I think those are my accessory questions. Thanks.
Ms. Lodge? Okay. Well, that was Mr. Jordan. Yes, Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure to staff that I understood Mr. Gullett, a comment I thought I just heard you made about additional open yard area requirement given the square footage of this property and an R2 zone, I mean, in order to approve the current project design. This is becoming more confusing than less confusing for me in some areas, so that's why I'm trying to drill down on the particulars.
Right. No, I'll bring up the slide of the actual requirement. Yeah. So this is what you need: 1,250 square feet of area. It can be in multiple locations because it's an R2, and as Mr. Zink showed, because there's multiple frontages, it can be 10 feet from one of the lot lines, one of the front lot lines. So the issue with the entry courtyard is that it doesn't meet the minimum 20-foot dimensions. So as
1 foot shy, is that correct?
it has to be 20 feet wide and 20 feet long, essentially.
I see,
So
20 by 20, okay, so
yeah.
it's 17 by 6. Is that correct?
17 and a half by 19.
by 19. And then there's
17 and a half. Oh, here's the 19. I said it says 17. Gotcha. Okay.
and that tower's skewed, so it's not that's at its maximum width.
Okay. Then perhaps for Mr. Vincent, Mr. Zink mentioned some financial penalties. Could you speak to that? For our
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, the financial penalties for having an illegal unit or basically any zoning violation don't change with the presence or absence of a zoning compliance declaration. A zoning violation is a violation. Each day that a zoning violation exists is a new and separate violation in and of itself. So to be able to prove, if we as the city discover an illegal unit and can prove its existence for a period of time, each individual day is potentially a separate violation. So as Mr. Zink mentioned, the zoning compliance declaration simply advises the property owner of the maximum potential penalty. So it doesn't actually change the penalty. It simply advises the present property owner and future owners of the property of the potential maximum penalty.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jordan, and then Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. want to follow down that same path again and just make sure I understand, so I understand that part. But is the process to get to where the penalty is a consequence the same process whether or not you have the declaration? That you still have to notice them, you have to wait, you have to notice them, you have to sue them, you have to, I mean, it takes a long period of time regardless of whether or not there's a declaration or not?
As I said before, that the zoning compliance declaration simply takes an affirmative defense that a property owner might assert, takes that away. It takes away the argument of an equitable estoppel, where the property owner would say that for some reason, by the fact that the city has allowed this property to exist in this condition and issued permits for its construction in that manner, somehow suggested to them that they could use their property in a way that we ultimately later determined to be illegal. It does simplify the process to a degree, but it is not, I would not suggest that it is a silver bullet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Cato, further context?
I just wanted to clarify, because I used to be the zoning enforcement supervisor. From our perspective, it doesn't really change anything. You still have to send out a notice of violation and give time to remedy the situation. None of those processes change. It makes it easier to prosecute them if they don't comply, and we have to send it off to the city attorney's office. Right? That's one more piece of ammunition against them. But the process itself doesn't change. Some time ago, it's been years now, we kind of looked into, is there a way to use the zoning compliance declaration to short circuit the whole process, right? If you have a zoning compliance declaration and we discovered an illegal dwelling unit, boom, you get immediate fine. And I don't remember exactly why we didn't go with that, but there was a reason that we didn't. And it was something.
Mr. Chair, the reason is constitutional due process.
What a concept. What a concept. Okay, Mr. Bartlett, and then we'll go to public comment.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gullett, you were talking about the small lot R2 and listing all the items regarding open space. Is the total open space requirement on the small lot R2 still the 1,250 square feet? Or was that reduced?
So if you're developing an accessory dwelling unit, which would be a second unit on this lot, the requirement is one area of at least 600 square feet or two areas at least 300 square feet each, with minimum dimensions of 10 feet rather than 20 feet.
So it's a 600-foot limit for small lot R2 versus the 1,250 that we're looking at?
Yes.
Okay. And then actually I had a question for Mr. Cato. It's that Exhibit E that's in our staff report.
Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Cato has left the room for a moment, so maybe you can hold that question until after the public comment, and we can start.
Maybe staff can answer it. It's the configuration of residential units that's dated November 2nd, 2001. Mr. Cato, this I think is a question for you. That Exhibit E, the configuration of residential units from 2001, it was page 6. It says detached structures and areas with no interior access to main living area. And then the first comment is you can have a shower if it's in an area that doesn't have direct access to the main living unit, or you can have an exterior shower. So if we go back to the alternate half-bath scheme that the applicant is saying that they would consider, you only have outdoor access to this part of the unit, why can't they have a shower here? This says that you can, because you have outside access only, no direct internal access.
Okay, on page 6, there are 3 headings. Which of the headings are you looking at?
This is number 1, under the detached and areas with no interior access to the main.
Okay, so let me read this. It says bathing facilities with interior access to the detached structure shall not be allowed.
So that's not it. And then it says, however, it says exterior showers or shower rooms with exterior access only can be allowed. So this whole area of the house is exterior access only. It's not
okay.
attached.
Look, let me explain. Let me explain the second sentence first, because I have to think about the first one. I think that might be a mistake. So exterior shower, that's pretty clear, right? The shower head's outside, everything's outside, you're taking a shower outside. That's the exterior shower. That's allowed in any configuration.
Sure.
So they could put something out in their little courtyard, right? The other thing that we have sometimes allowed is like in a cabana for a swimming pool, we've allowed, for example, can you switch back to the yeah, that one. So if we look at this configuration here of the full bath, and let's pretend that there's no interior access to it.
Okay.
We have in a couple of cases allowed, like, if there was room to put an exterior door here with no interior door. See what I mean? So it's essentially a bathroom that you can only get to from the outside, even though it's inside. Do you understand that concept? I mean, am I explaining it right?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are what are referred to in that second sentence that I read. Bathing facilities with interior access.
I mean, I think what the applicant is really wanting is a combination of this scheme in terms of the full bath, but then the other scheme where this is storage, so you have no direct access, you have to go outside.
Correct.
To either get to that room or to that bathroom. If this is just labeled cabana, does that solve the problem?
No.
No?
Okay, so
I mean, it's exterior access.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, let me try explaining because
Linguistically, what Mr. Cotto just said would be an exterior shower with no access to the interior of the main building. In other words, the point is you enter into the shower and you exit the shower, but you don't go into the building, in this case, the study. The fact that the bathroom in this example, in the applicant's proposal, because it's interior to the study, it has an entryway, a doorway between the study and the bathroom, that doesn't satisfy the exception that you're
Right.
referencing.
Okay. But it does reference shower room, so it could be, the shower room could be outside with a separate door with this, I guess. Okay, that makes it sort of clear.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just looking at the findings that are here for us. If we deny the request, it says the requested, number one, this is on page 6, the requested modification to the R2 open yard standards is not consistent with the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance. But they do meet the R2 standards, do they not? They're two separate.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Lodge, the reduced standard, the 600 square foot standard, is when you have a R2 lot between 5,000 and 6,000 square feet developed with 2 units. So that's the only time where the open yard is reduced.
Okay, it's 22.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, at this point in time, I'd like to open up the public portion for testimony from the public on this project. Is there anybody who would like to address the commission? Seeing no one coming forward, Mr. Cotto.
yeah, I just want to continue a little bit on this whole illegal dwelling unit idea and the
Let me
conversion.
first close the public portion.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. So the purpose of this whole memo that we did in 2000 and our whole practice of examining floor plan configurations for illegal dwelling units, the reason for that is what had happened is before about 1996, there were no standards, right? We do enforcement cases, and it'd be hard to declare an illegal dwelling unit because there was no definition of it, a good one, at least in our zoning ordinance. And about 96, we amended the definition of residential unit to add, I don't remember exactly what it says, but the proximal existence of things like exterior doors and sinks and dishwashers and refrigerators and things like that, right? And so that became, now there was a standard by which we could decide, we could declare a residential unit when we saw it, right? You kind of, we called it the duck rule. If it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, then it is a duck. So, and then once we got that, we ran with it. right? I mean, we were declaring residential units all over the place, and people were getting mad. So in 2001, when we came back to the commission with that report that's in the attachments, the purpose was to come to some sort of a balance, right? A balance between the desire of the city to not prevent, but try to discourage the proliferation of illegal dwelling units, and also a desire to, to understanding that a lot of these people who want these things don't want illegal units, but there's a balance, right? So when we talk about units, or configuration like this, where it has some internal access, it makes us nervous, but it does have some. Do we allow a full bath? It has to do with, well, what's the likelihood, or what's the length of the garage? What's the length of that hallway? If it's 100 feet long and you've got a 400 square foot accessory building at the other end, we're probably going to say no, that's not an adequate connection. It's because once we issue a permit for a bath for bathing facilities, no matter what happens, no matter how many times it's turned into an illegal dwelling unit, we do not have the ability to say, well, you've broken the rules X number of times, and now you have to take out that bathing facility. We don't, as much as we would like to be able to do that, there's a legal problem with that as well. So that's why we're so careful with what we allow sink-wise and bathing facility-wise. And so I just want to kind of give you a little bit of context of why we do what we do and how we do it. We're very careful, and we always look to what have we done in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Cato. What I like about this project is that it really brings to the commission the effort to try to balance big picture and technical issues, and it's particularly informative, I think, not only to us up here on the dais, but to the folks watching on TV as to the art and science of site planning and the zoning ordinance. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the comments and perspectives of my colleagues here. So I'm looking for a light to go on. And if I don't see anybody, I'd like to ask Mr. Jordan to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everything you just said. No, but, it's really, in a year and 8 months, it's just really frustrating to be in a position where you have to actually trust people. And then you find out that you can't trust people when they've done their due diligence and made an honest case. I think either one of the proposals, either the full bath or the half bath, really matches the existing house and the relationship to the neighborhood. I'm less concerned and have little concern about the little reduction in the open space, the open yard, and I agree with the modification request on moving the garage. I think that's an improvement, but it still comes down to how to resolve the conversion issues, and I don't have an answer. As you can tell, I've asked question after question and looking for that silver bullet, as Mr. Vincent calls it, to resolve that. So given all the points that have been made, that it's a one-story solution, it continues to maintain a low FAR, that house is a remarkable visual gem on the corner, as Mr. Zink so aptly described it. It's a welcome bit of real estate to view in that neighborhood. I would be happy either with the initial proposal for a full bath, if somebody had a suggestion on how to resolve the conversion. And barring that, I would be in full support of moving to a half bath with the return of the storage area to help mitigate the size of the garage and making what we can do to make sure that the garage isn't used for storage and there's adequate storage in the house. I think it's really frustrating and unfortunate that we're in this position. If this was my house as a couple, I would certainly want another fully functioning bathroom, and I would certainly want the ability, if I had a lot size, to invite friends to come stay at our house. And it's just unfortunate for all the reasons that have been listed. So that would be my recommendation, I think, would be the half bath with the storage, unless there's further input going down the line on how to handle the conversion issues with the full bath. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
may I make one suggestion for the Commission to consider as you're making your comments and moving towards deliberation? The instant question before the Commission today is a decision regarding the two modifications. The issue of whether or not this property is one residential unit or two residential units is actually a question for staff to decide. I would recommend an approach for the Commission in this manner, that you consider the requested modifications for the applicant's proposal. And if you find those modifications to be acceptable, given the findings that are required to be made, that you could grant an approval of those modifications with the condition that the project be designed in a manner that results in one residential unit. That leaves it to the applicant and staff to work out a configuration of the interior of this structure that satisfies the definition of one residential unit. And as far as the open space area and the interior modifications, if those configurations vis-a-vis the neighboring parcels and the public spaces that are adjacent to this property are acceptable to the Commission, and I believe you've done your job regarding that element of the land use process.
That is helpful direction, Mr. Vincent. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it is always the smallest projects that bring up the biggest issues, so, but maybe that's a good thing. On this one, I can definitely support the modification for the R2 open yard standards, given that only 600 square feet would be the requirement for the open yard. If you actually did this as a second unit, you'd way exceed the open yard. In fact, the existing entry courtyard would even count. So I think it's a technicality, the way this is written up, that you're being penalized because you're doing one unit. You need, more than double the open space requirement. So I can definitely support the open yard modification, and I can support the modification for the garage. It's similar encroachment to the existing garage. It's being moved closer to the street. We're eliminating hardscape, all the benefits that you pointed out in your presentation. And I respect the fact that your applicant wants to do, single story and a single unit. I think a lot of other people probably would have seen an advantage to do 2 units, and we would have probably a different set of modifications that we'd be making findings on. We'd probably be making a parking mod instead of an open space mod, so it would be a trade. But so I can support the modification requests, and I, just as comment to the applicant, I think that your desired scheme would be to go with this concept with the full bath and put the storage back in, and hope that's where it goes. But in terms of the modifications to try and get you down the road, I could support both. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Ms. Lodge?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Mr. Bartlett. I think you are being penalized, in effect, by trying to keep it one. And as far as the open yard areas go, and certainly the areas that are there or that will remain with the addition are generous and attractive and certainly usable. And I don't have any problem with the modification for the garage either. It is an architecturally charming house, as you said, and I think it would be an appropriate improvement.
Thank you. Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am in support of the 2 modifications. I have lived in a 900-square-foot house with a spouse and 4 children and streams of company and 1 bathroom. It's an art and a real lesson in sensitivity. But I don't live there anymore. And now I live in 1,200 square feet with streams of company. so, and a husband, and the kids are gone, but they're all back with more. So it's still crowded, but we get pleasure in breaks, so that's nice. I appreciate what Mr. Vincent put before us. I certainly do believe an art studio is a very reasonable use of the property for an artist. The project remains a modest amount of square footage. We do have the conundrum, so I'm just sticking to the mods today, and staff can do the determining they need to do, but I will support the modifications. And I appreciate that the staff hearing officer had a hard time, too, as she and I discussed following the hearing briefly. And I would love it if Mr. Vincent would tell me what extopol means, or at least how to spell it so I can look it up.
ESTOPPEL.
Thank you.
Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, to staff, I want to say that I too appreciate the sharpening of your pencils in looking at this, because we have a jigsaw puzzle almost between the kind of lot that this is with the 2003 structure, modern living standards and needs relative to an older set of zoning requirements. And so I don't want to penalize the property owner and the neighborhood from being able to have something on this property that works for all and that staff can support. I would say that a full bath with returning the storage area to appropriate use might be the best way to go in terms of a compromise. At this point, I am in support of the two modifications. I think the community benefits are important to consider and incorporate into our decision making. That the property owner, and with Mr. Zink representing them, are not only willing to stay with one story, but appreciate the importance of staying with one story in the Bungalow Haven neighborhood, tells me that they're sensitive property owners and redevelopers. Moving the garage forward and then giving it direct access use to the house, I think, is an improvement all around. And the solar access, to my knowledge, I don't think there's much of it in the neighborhood. So I think that's an enlightened additional offering of the development. So all in all, while the zoning compliance declaration may not satisfy some of us in the way we would ultimately like, I think there are other ways to forge a compromise that allow the property owner to move forward, support the modifications, and perhaps you can kind of craft the rest of it that will satisfy all parties. But I'd like to see it go in that direction if possible. Thank you.
Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that, as a reminder to all of us, that the open yard area, being the courtyard, as a dedicated open yard area, can never be closed once we make it open yard area. So that means that there won't be infill over that portion of the lot, if I have that correct. Thanks.
Thank you. I've really been sitting on the fence on this particular project. I think the applicant has been creative and showed considerable candor in addressing the commission, both at the site visit and today in our proceedings here. The concerns that I have relate to the fact that this was two modifications were already granted when the previous project was constructed, and the current owners bought a property that was on an extremely constrained lot, and here we have them coming back for two additional modifications. I'm okay with the one parking space. I think the single-story design is compatible with the neighborhood. I understand it's somewhat of a catch-22, and this may be if there's any additional development to take place on this property, this may be the Pareto optimal solution in terms of what we can get. Yet I remain concerned about the open yard. I think the modification for the garage is appropriate and the findings can be made. I understand and really appreciate staff's reluctance to make the findings, particularly on the open yard, because it does split things in two. But I have to say I am influenced by the comments made by my colleagues, and I am in support of the project. While reluctantly so, I understand that this is the best effort that can be made, and that I think it will, practically speaking, provide a net benefit to the neighborhood and to the applicant as well. So with that, I'd entertain a motion on the two mods before us. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to make that motion. So the motion would be to uphold the appeal and approve the modification requests for the open yard and the garage encroachment into the interior side yard, with the understanding that the resultant project will remain one residential unit.
Second?
We have a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, before we vote, I need to ask staff, we don't have any conditions in our package. Are there any conditions of approval that were presented to the staff hearing officer?
No, Mr. Chair, at the time that this was presented to the staff hearing officer, we were also recommending denial, so we don't have conditions to carry forward. We had only mentioned in the staff report the one about the bath. So with the insertion that this project be limited to one dwelling unit and that configuration be worked out between staff and applicant, that addresses that. I'm not sure if there'd be additional standard conditions to add.
Mr. Cato.
I don't think any standard ones, but perhaps did the commission want to think about having the wall be moved out towards Olive Street to make the remaining open yard more usable? That was a suggestion that I would make.
As the maker of the motion, I wouldn't support that additional burden on the applicant, given that you're allowed to have walls within your open yard.
Ms. Lodge?
I would concur with Mr. Bartlett, and the space seems quite usable to me.
Mr. Chair, one potential solution here would be the applicant's representative is very familiar with the city's standard conditions of approval for planning commission projects, with the one exception of the single residential unit condition that's in addition today. With the applicant's representative's concurrence, I would recommend that the Planning Commission condition the project with its standard conditions of approval as applicable to this project. Those conditions, primarily we're talking about the conditions of approval regarding the hours of construction, the days of construction, construction routes, those material, those kinds of conditions that would apply to the construction of the proposed project.
I would be happy to include that in the motion, and we will have a chance to review, the minutes and the resolution, in draft form as it comes back to the commission. So at least we'll get to see it before it's ratified.
Mr. Cato?
Yes. Thank you. This is a modification process. Normally, when we go to the staff hearing officer with these types of projects, they have a very minimal number of conditions that only have something specifically to do with the project. We don't put the standard conditions that you see, on the planning commission. We don't put those hours of operation and that sort of thing because they're small enough projects that we think that the ordinance covers it. So I'm not sure that that's necessary.
Then my recommendation would be that you put the conditions as typically appropriate for a staff hearing officer approval.
I concur with that.
Go ahead, Ms. Lodge.
I do too, as a seconder.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask the commission about the zoning declaration, since this is modifications only, so we don't apply a zoning declaration or ask for that, even though the applicant offered it. It's not the time. I just want to make sure we address that before I don't want to leave it out of the motion if it's something that.
Ms. Brooks?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Larson, I think as we work out the floor plan configuration with the applicant, we may or may not require that anyway. If you want to add it as a condition, it's certainly fine, but it may come up as a requirement from our standpoint, too.
Thank you.
Okay. I do have concerns about hours of operation. The project we approved on on the East Arriaga block in this very same neighborhood created a considerable amount of hardship for the adjoining residents because there was a lack of courtesy and respect across property lines in terms of both noise, hours of operation, what have you. So I think there needs to be some way to guarantee that the standards that we expect of typical development here are abided by, so that we don't create even short-term issues. And we are dealing with the relocation of the garage on the property line, so that to me raises a red flag. So I don't want to complicate this matter. I would leave it up to staff to get that issue addressed, but I think it is something that should not be dismissed, particularly when you're asking for modifications of side yard setbacks. So with that kind of understanding, we can hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Last comment.
Last comment. When I was at the staff hearing officer, I could have gotten approval for the modifications for a half bath. I chose to take an appeal because I felt like the consideration that my applicant was going for with a one-story solution versus a conforming two-story addition was worthy of a little bit of leniency in the enforcement of, if it looks like a duck, it is a duck kind of analogy. So I'm here in front of you asking you to approve this project with a full bath. And if that's not something you're wanting to do, by saying I'm going to resolve it with staff outside of this room, it's going to get resolved into a half bath. My client gets his mod, he gets his one-story building, and that's fine. But I want you to understand, by not saying approving the project with a full bath, it's going to become a half bath solution, and that's just what happens.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be happy to add that into the motion. I thought it was clear, but maybe we need to make it redundant that we are approving the mods with the understanding that it will be one residential unit and that the addition includes a full bath.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Vincent?
The determination of whether or not there are the definition that this ordinance, it specifically says that it's the community development director that determines whether or not a residential unit exists or not. And my recommendation to the commission was to allow or give the commission a way to make a determination regarding the modifications that are before it, but to recognize that and leave open the opportunity for the applicant to find a solution that is beneficial to the applicant, but that at the same time satisfies staff in their application of the zoning ordinance. The applicant can choose to go to the half bath if they want to have that door separating the studio and the study. There may be another solution that allows for a full bath, but right now I was trying to get the planning commission, or give the planning commission the opportunity to not get bogged down on that decision, particularly when the applicant's representative is the only party here and the applicant, the client, isn't. The bottom line is that the determination of whether or not there are one or two residential units presented by this particular design or any future design of the applicant is a determination made by the community development staff. And so that's where I see that decision lying.
So, Mr. Vincent, you're suggesting that a finding regarding a modification should not be conditioned upon internal improvements regarding half or a full bath or what?
My recommendation regarding one, that the condition refer to one residential unit, was intended to allow for the opportunity for the applicant to consider any allowable design that has one residential unit. As the applicant clearly showed in his presentation, that the addition of a second residential unit on this property, it starts a domino effect that kicks in additional parking requirements, and basically, from my perspective, would require the removal of the existing structures almost entirely in order to have two residential units. I understand the applicant is looking for a one residential unit solution. It's just coming down to whether or not there's going to be a full bath in this addition or a half bath in this addition. And while that's up to the applicant to decide what to propose, it is the Community Development Department staff's decision as to whether or not that is proposing one or two residential units.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. For the purposes of clarity, before I call a question, I'd like to get a sense of the motion that we are voting on. So either staff or the motion maker, if they could reiterate what it is we're going to be voting on, that would help me get this wrapped up and so we can move on. Mr. Gullett?
Mr. Chair, I believe the motion on the table is to uphold the appeal, approving the modifications subject to the condition that the resultant building shall remain as a single residential unit, and all other typical applicable staff hearing officer conditions be applied. And I don't recall if the commission discussed the hours of operation as part of the motion.
There was commentary on the hours of operation, but no formal integration into the motion. And Mr. Bartlett, if you could give us a sense whether that is in the spirit of your motion or...
I think that's in the spirit. I thought that our support of the modification request was based upon the applicant's proposal before us, which is the full bath proposal. I mean, usually we review projects. This is the project we're presented with. We're not going with the alternate, and we're not looking at the plan that was reviewed by the staff hearing officer a few months ago. So my motion is approval of the two modification requests for the full bath proposal, which is the application before us. And I did not add anything about the construction hours.
Ms.
Mr.
Brooks.
Chair, if I might add, you are correct, Commissioner Bartlett, that the two applications before you are two modification applications. So you're modifying the zoning standards that apply to this property, and it would result in a project that has the general footprint that is shown in the applicant's revised proposal. I can tell you that in almost any project that's approved at the Planning Commission or Staff Hearing Officer, things move within inside the building all the time. Other code requirements come to play and things move. Full baths become half baths, other doors move, and so we're typically not tied to the exact interior layout usually. So I would just offer that as how we've operated in the past when actions have been taken on specific applications.
So we're dealing with the footprint articulated in this revised proposal. And is that acceptable to the motion maker?
That's acceptable wording.
Then let's take a vote on this project. All in favor?
Mr. Chair, I have another
Yes.
question.
Mr. Jordan.
Sorry. So I've confused myself then on that. If that's what we're limiting ourselves to, it seems clear to me that staff has already made it clear that a full bath is not going to meet the intent of the zoning requirements for conversion issues, what is the applicant's remedy if we send it back as we're moving towards to just talking about the footprint and he still wants a full bath and you still have the same concerns? What's his remedy then?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, other things that we would look to help find a compromise would be removing some of the exterior access points to the addition. So, for example, possibly removing the exterior access to the open yard from the study, making it just more difficult to access that as a separate dwelling unit. So that's an option. If the full bath is an amenity that the applicant really wants, then we would look for other ways to come more in line with our administrative policies for how we review the floor plans.
And then eventually, if those don't prove a remedy that the applicant's willing to accept and there's nothing else that you can offer, what remedy is available to the applicant then? Nothing?
Nothing. There's no
Okay.
appeal provisions
All right.
for that decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph. I do have one other item that may help clarify where we're going with this, because the last thing that I'm intending with this motion is that the applicant now appeal to City Council because he essentially got a non-answer. He's leaving here with the same question mark in his head that caused this appeal. So would the applicant be willing to eliminate the gate access to the large courtyard so that the only access to this residential unit is within the house and through the courtyard rather than through the outside open space?
I understand. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I understand the question, and I would say no because I know we've stood in that gravel area and we watched the sun. So for the way that they've entertained, that I've been with them as their architect, we have gone out that gate and we've stood at that area. Olive Street is below you, and we take a look at the ocean and the treetops. So by taking that away from them, they're not here right now, but I would say that that would be a hindrance on them. But thank you for the offer.
Are you satisfied that our motion will get you somewhere that you can end up with a solution, or is this just going to lead perhaps to another appeal?
It's my client's decision on whether or how much he wants to have the full bath, and if he wants it, then I'll go in front of the city council with the same spiel that I gave you guys here. The choice is he is willing to take the half bath. I've got that for him. I've got the mods. I was hoping that I would get some understanding because this one-size-fits-all policy, it causes hardship on some people, and I believe my client is giving of a lot in the sense of the carved-out courtyard, the tower, and the one-story solution. I'm asking for a little bit of understanding.
Chair, I think it's time to call the question then.
Thank you for your direction, Mr. Bartlett. All in favor for the project as proposed, as the motion is made?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't articulate a vote.
I'm sorry.
I apologize, but what I am voting for when I vote for this are the two mods. So my aye vote indicates support for the two modifications.
Thank you. This project is approved and is appealable to the City Council within 10 days. Thank you very much. Let's take a very short 5-minute recess. I'm going to reconvene at 25 till 12.
Mr. Chair, I'll be stepping down from the next item. Although the steps are 221 feet down there, the parcel runs all the way up to Mesa Lane and is close to my house.
Thank you very much. Having our quorum back in the room, I'm going to call this meeting back to order, and we will move on to our next agenda item, which is an application by Ms. Jill Zachary for improvements at the end of Mesa Lane. Mr. Cato?
Yes, we have a blast from the past, familiar face giving the staff report, Ms. Jan Hubble, who used to sit at this desk.
Ms. Hubble.
Thank you, Mr. Cato and Chair Justice. And this project is for the Mesa Lane stairs. This is a request for a coastal development permit in the appealable jurisdiction. This shows the location of the stairs. The area that we're actually looking at is circled at the bottom. This is a little closer view, and this shows best the condition that exists for these stairs. The existing condition is that the concrete stairs are breaking up, and that is leading to a potential safety hazard. The rebar that supports both that concrete mass support that supports the landing and the stairs is not acceptable under current design for this kind of a project. The rebar is not wrapped in epoxy. The rust is causing the concrete to spall, which is break up into little pieces from the inside out. And the concrete mix itself is not appropriate for the coast. It's eroding more quickly than the appropriate mix would normally do. This gives you a closer look of the concrete stairs themselves and how badly they are eroding. A couple of you I know were on the site visit with me on Tuesday, and I know that most of the rest of you visited over the 3-day weekend. It's a really tough site visit. And when you get to the bottom of those stairs, that gets pretty awkward trying to get down that last bit of it. This shows a detail of the concrete degradation and how the rebar plays a role in it. And this shows the landing block damage, and that's largely caused by rebar and the concrete mix as well. You know, we're timing this now because it's a key coastal access for the Mesa and other Santa Barbara residents. There's a long distance between coastal access points if this is lost. If Mesa Lane steps are closed, it's almost 2 miles from Hendry's Beach to 1,000 Steps with no coastal access. The current design is less consistent with the Coastal Act and the local coastal plan than the proposed is. The large concrete block supporting the landing interferes more with coastal processes than the new design will. And the city needs to be proactive to reduce closure time. If we wait for the steps to fail, the stairs will be closed a lot longer while the city completes design, permitting, searching for funding, et cetera. And also, in order to apply for grants, the project must have its approval and its CEQA determination. So this is part of the timing. We set some preliminary design goals, meet coastal engineering requirements. The Coastal Commission requires that we assume climate change resulting in higher water levels. We must withstand at least a 50-year storm and 50 years of erosion. We were looking for something that was aesthetically similar or better. We were not interested in making major design changes. The design needs to be sturdy enough with minimal potential for breaking apart during storms, which reduces the potential for debris pounding the bluff. We wanted it to stay landward of mean high water. There's less potential for environmental concerns and greater consistency with the LCP and Coastal Act, and means that we don't have to go to the Coastal Commission for approval. We also wanted a design that minimizes maintenance requirements. It's much easier to get funding for construction than it is for maintenance. We wanted to minimize erosion barriers and hard structures along the shoreline, and removing that large concrete block will be a part of that. We want to stay as close to the bluffs as possible. That also minimizes intrusion into the beach and minimizes aesthetic impacts and stays out of the water most of the time. And we wanted to minimize environmental effects resulting from demolition, construction, and use of the stairs, as well as from any storm damage. And the project description requirements have all of those things built into them that minimize the potential for environmental effects. So the basic project description is We're replacing those wood piles and the concrete mass foundation with stainless steel piles, stairs, guard, and handrails, and with the exception that there will still be a concrete stair element at the base. So that way we make sure that there are stairs even as the sand goes out in the wintertime, and you don't drop the last two or 3 feet down to the ground without anything to support you. The piles will be grouted into concrete in holes drilled into bedrock at least 12 feet for the large piles and 6 feet for the small. There will be no large concrete foundation block to support the upper landing, and there will be new concrete stairs at the lower landing. This is a schematic of how it will look. We've designed it so that the piles themselves are minimized. They don't go up beyond the top of the stairs. And as you can see, there is deep grouting into the surface. We will be staging the project in the overflow parking area at Arroyo Burro County Beach. We have been talking to county park staff and have their concurrence with this approach. The access to the site will be via the beach. We'll go around the west side of the restaurant. There is a way to get around the west side of the restaurant and then drop down a ramp that goes to the beach. It's possible that 1 or 2 pieces of equipment will actually be able to walk over the rocks to the beach, a la some Star Wars type of figure. The concrete trucks may pump concrete from the Mesa Lane, from the top of the Mesa Lane stairs, and if they do, we will prohibit them from blocking the intersection at Edgewater Way and Mesa Lane to minimize the impacts on the neighbors. The stairs will be closed for 3 months. Closure would start the day after Labor Day to avoid the highest beach use season. I know that there's still a lot of use after Labor Day, but kids are back in school. At least during the day, it's not as heavy, and mostly not doing construction on weekends. Also, it avoids the summer grunion runs. We want to finish by December 1st to minimize the potential for being affected by the rainy season and any effects to tidewater gobies if there are higher flows from Arroyo Burro Creek. So this slide shows the construction, the staging area. The staging area would be at the far end of the overflow parking lot, and from there the construction vehicles would turn onto Cliff Drive and come back down through the parking lot, around the west side of the restaurant, and then down the beach. We have discussion about policy consistency, and a fairly substantial one, because this has a lot of policy issues. The LCP specifically calls out the Mesa Lane stairs as a high priority coastal access. Coastal access and coastal dependent uses are the highest priorities in the Coastal Act. Stairs will be closed during construction. However, there are other coastal points, and we've minimized the period of closure. Views are important. The scenic and visual qualities of the coast are an important resource. They will be improved with a new design because the large concrete structure will be removed, reducing the potential for graffiti. And it is quite often graffitied. The neighbors have been great about taking care of it. If it's pretty, they leave it for a while until it gets kind of funky looking. And if it's not pretty, it gets painted over really quickly. But it's an ongoing issue. The Architectural Board of Review considered the project in July and had positive comments on project aesthetics. The marine environment policies call for protection of marine resources and the biological productivity and quality of coastal water streams, wetlands, and estuaries. They also require protection against hazardous material spills, and a detailed project description was developed for the project that minimizes the potential effects and maximizes consistency with those policies, including best management practices, a spill prevention and containment plan, and a construction staging plan. We also consulted an experienced biologist regarding the location of tidewater gobies in the Creek Lagoon. They prefer the upper end of the lagoon near the Cliff Drive Bridge. They do not hang out in the creek near the ocean, and they also, they only flow out during the high flows. Project description requires that there will be no access across the creek mouth during and for 2 days following a 1-inch or greater rain event, and the presence of a biological monitor is required whenever the creek is flowing. Although all of those provisions related to all this have been included in the detailed project description, we've also incorporated them in the conditions of approval, and we have added a construction compliance monitor for the project so that we make sure all of those conditions are carried out during the project. The Coastal Act also requires protection of environmentally sensitive habitats, and primary habitats being the intertidal zone and the creek. Talked about the creek already. We've minimizing the effects on the tidal zone by allowing access only during low tides. The Coastal Act and LCP require construction on the bluff to be limited to public access ways and pipelines, and of course this is a public access way. We're not impacting the bluff. There is a geotechnical memo that is attached to the project that also notes that. We have determined on the basis of the detailed project description that the project is environmentally exempt from environmental review under 15302, which allows for reconstruction of existing facilities. The project has been designed to avoid visual, biological, geologic, water quality, recreation, and shoreline resources impacts, as well as significant noise and traffic impacts. So, staff recommendation is to approve the coastal development permit for the project, making the findings outlined in the staff report. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Hubble. Ms. Zachary, do you have any additional comments you'd like to make to the Commission?
Chair Jostis and members of the Commission, some very brief comments. I'm Jill Zachary. I'm the Assistant Director of the Parks and Recreation Department. And I just want to add a few things. Number one, it's one of the 3 coastal beach access stairways that the city manages, and it's the responsibility of the Parks and Recreation Department. This stairway was first constructed in 1982. The last major work that was done on it was in early 90s. What we're proposing is a project that will last 50 years rather than 20 years. And the stairs themselves are well loved and well used, as many of you may know, by Mesa residents, by Santa Barbara residents. There's people I've met from UCSB that go there to surf, and they're in school here. So they're very well known and they're very well loved. Reconstruction of the lowest section became a priority for our department about 5 years ago, in part because of the coastal access, and really in part because of our concern that significant damage could result in the closure of those stairs for an extended period of time. And that's something that would not be popular with Santa Barbara residents and not something that we would want to do. This project is also a project that's feasible for grant funding. As we all know, grant funding is pretty limited these days. In order for the city to pursue grant funding, though, we do need our plans and permits, and so that the funding agency knows the project's real, that the city's committed. So because of that, we've been advocating for the past number of years to maintain at least this amount of funding in our capital program. The remainder of the department's capital program has pretty much been decimated with the budget reductions. In the most recent budget cycle, it was reprioritized by the Parks and Recreation Commission and the City Council. And the City Council set aside $200,000 to serve as grant matching funds for any grant funding that we could obtain. We expect the project to cost $600,000. We would move forward with submitting 3 different grant applications in the next 3 to 4 months. That we know we're eligible for. So just wanted to provide you with that background. Ultimately, we would really like to build this project in 2012. If it takes us another year to secure the funds, then 2013 would be our goal. And then lastly, I'd just like you to know that we've done outreach to the neighborhood. We sent out 700 notices to all the surrounding neighbors, giving them the sense that this project is coming along, letting them know of the public review. And some of the feedback that we've gotten to date has been, how can I help? So that's a really great thing to hear. Lastly, Leslie Wiscombe, who's the chair of the Parks and Recreation Commission, is here, and also Rocky Jacobson, who's just here in the audience for the Commission's benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite the chair of the Parks and Recreation Commission to address the Commission, then I'll open up the public portion. Leslie.
Thank you, Chair Jostis and members of the Commission. I'm Leslie Wiscombe and Chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission, and I'm really here just to make a few comments on behalf of the Commission. The Parks and Recreation Commission strongly supports advancement of the Mesa Lane Steps renovation project, and they actually made it one of their recommendations to City Council in a memorandum dated May 31st, 2011. In this memorandum, the Commission expressed concern that the ongoing deterioration of the lower area of the steps puts this important and well-used link in jeopardy of being closed until the project can be completed. As well, during our July meeting, the project was reviewed in more detail and wholeheartedly supported by the Commission. As Ms. Zachary mentioned, the construction phase of the project is not fully funded, and obtaining the coastal development permit at this time will greatly improve the chances of staff successfully obtaining funding through outside sources to complete the construction of this project. And finally, I'd just like to say, as one of many of a very long list of deferred capital projects in the 6-year plan, the Commission believes this project to be a top priority to improve safety for both our residents and our visitors. And I know Ms. Zachary mentioned UCSB people. I've seen people from out of state. I use the steps all the time, and there's people that hear about them and come on over, and they're from the East Coast, so they're very well used. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Wiscombe. At this point in time, I'd like to open up the public portion, inviting members of the public to address the Commission on this matter. Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public portion, and we'll bring it back to the Commission for deliberation. This is clearly a replacement project. It's had an extensive amount of analysis. I particularly enjoyed the hindcasting data represented in Appendix B, but I'd like to throw it over to my colleagues for comment and a motion. Ms. Schwartz?
Thank you. Perhaps for Ms. Hubble. I know that graffiti has been an issue in this area, and I'm wondering if there's any new surface treatment available on concrete that will help us not so much perhaps prevent it, but for easy removal and perhaps a more attractive, lasting result, so that we avoid some of the blotchiness, or that's a non-technical term, but that we see elsewhere in town, like on our sound walls and so forth.
Yeah, I believe there is something that is available that we could put on it that would ease the removal, and of course, the canvas will be substantially reduced on top of that, which will also help. There doesn't seem to be as much graffiti that occurs on those stairs for some reason as has happened on the big block, although if the big block's gone, maybe there'll be a little more interest. But yeah, I think we could do that.
Thank you. That's my only question, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Larson?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any questions, just some comments. If that's all right.
Please do.
Thanks. First of all, if you're going to do it right. And I really appreciate the use of the stainless steel, because I think that planning, when you have an opportunity to salvage infrastructure such as this, the further out we can plan those materials to last, of course, the more benefit we're all going to get. And so I'm very much in support of this. I had to stop using those stairs a long time ago because I can't take the final leap with little kids and myself and everything. So it'll be the 7-inch rise. It'll be a great set of stairs. And it's wonderful that we can take advantage at this time, and I think it's extremely important we seize opportunities as they come for preserving our infrastructure, including our very unique 4 miles of beach that the city maintains, that people are unaware that a city of under 100,000 people has so much to maintain. So the grant opportunities become very important. It's like a small family getting some huge bonus or something, and they get to paint the outside of the house. We just need to do these kinds of things, and so I very much support this project, and I appreciate that staff has looked for opportunities to take advantage of grants and funding outside of of what would look to most of us as the regular route. Also, I think it's really good that we can do it for $600,000 versus a couple million. And by delaying or using the improper materials, we could easily run up double that cost or more for a project that could be done cheaply now. So I'm happy to support this project with the coastal development permit and anything else that you need. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Ms. Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is clearly a project that needs doing, and if we're ready for a motion, I'm ready to make one.
Let me just, Ms. Lodge, let me just touch base on Mr. Bartlett, who has not had an opportunity to comment, and then we'll come back to you quickly. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, likewise, I'm very supportive of the whole premise of this project and the urgency and the ability to seek grant funding. I think those are really positive attributes. We appreciate the site visit. I think that was very informative. I like the proposed solution. I think this is really long-term thinking, and I hope that we can do this with other infrastructure projects in the future. So I am in support of this as well, and I think you've really thought out the construction staging and hours and everything else, so I'm feeling comfortable with that. I do have a couple of comments, as the project moves forward. I don't know if you have the ability to put up the plans that you had by Bengal Engineering, if you have those I'm looking at page 7, which was their plan view and section of the proposed stair. One of Ms. Larson's comments was about not being able to make the last step. I know it's a little hard to see in this diagram, but the way it's labeled in our set is obviously the sand level varies, and right now it's designed with a step at the bottom. I think the steps should continue below the sand level, so as the sand rises up and down, you don't end up with a giant first step. And relative to that comment and the ADA requirements that are depicted on this sheet for handrail extensions, when you look at the plan view, which is to the left, all of those improvements are going to cross over your easement line. So you may need to adjust the alignment of this stairway so that you don't encroach beyond your existing easements. I don't want to see that slow the project down. Those are just, comments as you go forward on the technical and engineering side. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few comments. First, as only one of 3 stairs leading down to the beach in Santa Barbara, I think this is a critical project, and I appreciate both the Parks and Rec staff and the Commission and the City Council for identifying and acknowledging the high priority nature of the project. I think that deferred maintenance is a losing proposition for the city on all fronts, so that this has been moved up to being a priority project, I think is critical, and it's the right thing. That we're going after matching funds now to get into the pipeline is really important because of diminishing opportunities to secure grant funding, and if we can do this in 2012, I think it's terrific. And with that, I am pleased to support a motion.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Ditto to everything that's been said. Go to Ms. Lodge for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just ask that the motion that you give them a help along the way with the graffiti by adding to the conditions of approval that graffiti, an anti-graffiti finish be applied to concrete elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lodge?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would move to make the findings that the project is consistent with the policies of the California Coastal Act, that's A, B, and C, and that 2, the project is consistent with all applicable policies of the city's local coastal plan and all that goes with that, and to approve the conditions of approval with the addition of a requirement that an anti-graffiti finish be put on the solid surfaces in this project.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. This project is appealable within 10 days. Thank you very much. You have a project. With this, I'm going to move on to our administrative agenda, having to do with any reports from our staff hearing officer liaison. Ms. Larson, do you have anything to update us with this week?
Just one this week, and it was pretty simple. You'll be glad to hear. It was a mod approval for, I believe, an interior yard setback on Cliff Drive. Thank you.
Okay. Other committees and liaison reports, Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Downtown Parking Committee was on summer hiatus, but as of this morning is back in session, and I attended that monthly meeting. What's key on their agenda, and I think might be of interest to our commission and the public, is that the city has been approached by an elevator advertising company. It is based locally, but it does business nationally. And so preliminary discussions are underway with the transportation staff as to what type of advertising might be appropriate and attractive, where it could be a new revenue opportunity for the city. There will be one lot that would be identified for an initial 3-month pilot project. I don't want to jump the gun, but there was a lot of interest in parking lot 10 as possibly being that pilot project location because it has cameras associated with the elevators. And so if there was any type of vandalism or abuse in any way that could be tracked, the city will be developing policies that are appropriate for the type of advertising it wants to encourage or allow, and it will be bringing a preliminary proposal with details back to the Downtown Parking Committee next month.
Thank you. Ms. Larson, you have further comments to add?
I don't want to miss reporting on the task force for the writing of the new historic element for the city. And we have met several times. We're working on policies and starting to work on the implementations and definitions. So we are making terrific progress, I think. And I'm looking forward to when this will be presented.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Having no further business, commission meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.